Hi, my name is Eunice Padilla, and I am in discussion section A05 of this course with Isaiah Zaracho. In this video, I'll be reflecting on what I've learned over the course, focusing specifically on 2 weeks of class content that have resonated with me and how those topics have impacted my perspective. I am a first-gen Hispanic young 18-year-old straight female pursuing a bachelor's degree in biochemistry. I identify myself as a Mexican American. Growing up in a Hispanic household, I was always aware how economic systems, like the ones that affect labor and immigration, impact people in my community. My parents, like many immigrant families, worked hard to create a better life for us, often facing challenges in terms of access to resources, opportunities, etc. Being a first gen has definitely shaped the way I view issues related to race, labor, and immigration. I've seen firsthand the struggles that come with being an immigrant or being a child of immigrants, whether it's navigating systems that were designed for people like us or dealing with the stigma around immigration and labor. Before taking this course, I knew that these issues were important to me, but I didn't fully understand how deeply connected they are to things like race, nationalism, and global capitalism. In my final project for ethnic studies, I have chosen to focus on week 7 and 10. In week 7, I learned how racial identity, labor, and nationalism intersected historically in the U.S. and other settler colonial contexts. A significant concept discussed by Dr. Sasaki was how the Portuguese community in Hawaii navigated racial identity in the context of labor competition with Japanese immigrants. This is a perfect example of how labor struggles often intersect with racial identity and nationalism. Dr. Sasaki explained how, despite being from a European background, the Portuguese in Hawaii were faced with competition from Japanese immigrants who were entering Hawaii as plantation laborers. The Portuguese, while also working in the fields, found themselves in a racially complex position. Even though they were European, they still struggled with the stigma of being quote-unquote non-white or not fully accepted in white American society. In this context, the Portuguese community began to emphasize their whiteness to align themselves with white Americans, who were also critical in the influx of Asian workers. This racial positioning was not just about identity, it was about labor politics. The Portuguese laborers saw Japanese immigration as a direct threat to their wages. As Japanese laborers drove down wages by accepting lower pay, Portuguese workers and other European immigrants in Hawaii banded together to advocate for an end to Asian immigration. They pushed for the idea that Europeans were more quote-unquote fit for work and should be prioritized over Asians, further reinforcing the racialized and competitive labor hierarchy. The concept of racialized labor in this historic example is important because it reveals how race and labor politics were interactively linked to national identity and citizenship. In this case, the Portuguese community was not only trying to secure better wages, but also seeking recognition within the racial hierarchy of the time. They attempted to align themselves with whiteness to gain economic and social advantages, showing how whiteness was not just a racial category, but also a social and economic status tied to national identity and labor rights. The knowledge I gained from this week made me realize how racial identity can be fluid and how groups often negotiate their identity based on economic interests. The Portuguese community in Hawaii, for example, claimed their whiteness in a way that was tied directly to their economic survival and their attempt to gain labor privileges that came with being recognized as white within the racial hierarchy of the U.S. In Dr. Sasaki's chapter, it was mentioned how the Portuguese community tried to position itself as white and therefore worthy of higher wages and better working conditions than Japanese immigrants. Their racial positioning, in effect, mirrored the larger national discourse that aimed to differentiate between good labor as in white and bad labor as in Asian, which helped shape labor policies and immigration laws in the U.S. during that time. This concept ties into larger historical narratives where race is used to legitimize or exclude different labor groups. In week 10, the concept that really stood out to me was global capitalism and how it impacts immigration. Before this course, I knew that global capitalism was a big deal, but I didn't really understand how it connected to immigration and labor. Dr. Gosson's lecture on NAFTA helped me see how global economic policies actually shape migration patterns and the types of jobs people end up doing. The key point that stuck with me is how global capitalism affects both the countries people are leaving and the countries they are migrating to. When NAFTA went into effect in 1994, manufacturing jobs in the U.S. started moving to Mexico because labor was much cheaper there. While companies were saving money by paying lower wages, this really hurt Mexican farmers, who could no longer compete with the cheap subsidized crops from the U.S. The devaluation of the Mexican peso in the late 1990s made the situation even worse, pushing even more Mexicans to come to the U.S. in search of work. What I didn't realize before this class is that Immigration isn't just about people looking for better opportunities. It's about escaping a system that makes it impossible to survive where they're from. So it's really a necessity driven by larger economic forces. It's just not just this personal decision. The maquiladora system was another example that really opened my eyes. These were factories set up doing the US-Mexico border where companies from the US could pay lower wages and avoid labor laws and environmental regulations. The idea was that it would benefit both countries, but what actually happened was that these factories mainly helped corporations make more profit while workers didn't see much improvement in their lives. Growing up, I always saw the challenges my family faced in terms of work, immigration status, and economic opportunities, but I didn't fully understand how these struggles were tied to larger global systems of capitalism and racial inequality. I realized that these issues aren't just about individual struggles or even just about national borders. They're connected to much more historical and ongoing systems that affect millions of people. The readings and lectures, particularly about how global capitalism drives migration and exploits immigrant labor, really opened my eyes to the way my own family's experience fits into a larger picture of race-based labor nationalism. I now see that the challenges we face are part of a much deeper and systemic problem, one that involves not just economics, but race, nationalism, and power dynamics on a global scale. Understanding this has made me reflect more on how I can approach issues like immigration policy, workers' rights, and even my own place in the broader conversation about labor and race in America. It's changed the way I think about the policies that shape people's lives and has made me more motivated to engage with these issues, both in my studies and in my future career. Thank you.